Hello, hi. For those who are looking at the pre-record, I've just opened it up a minute early, so you might want to fast forward a little bit. I'm just leaving it like this so that people can connect, and once I begin to see people um, in watching this, then we will go. If you are if you're just joining us, do type see and hear below. Just let me know that you can see and hear me. That would be very helpful. Great, somebody's liked us. Thank you. I think I know who that is. Yes, okay, that's good. Can you see and hear me okay? Great, thank you, Steve. That's terrific. Okay, I'm just going to give us, hi Anders, I'm just going to give us a minute to get going. All right, James. Okay, lovely. That's good. People are beginning to log on. That's good. Carolyn. Hi. Hi, Carolyn. Good. All right. So I hope everybody's well and managing. Interesting, I'm just noticing the difference 1 hour makes. I noticed the light is different. I normally have sunlight on my forehead by this time, but because the clocks have gone forward, um, it's 10 o'clock or 10:01 GMT at the moment. So this is technically an hour earlier from us, from the usual. So oh, lovely. Hello, Maggie. Yes, I hope in Bonnie, Scotland, you're having some sunshine. I'm just saying, I can notice the difference with the light. I think as the talk goes on, the sun will move around and you'll begin to notice the difference. Okay, all right. Hello, Mark. Hi. Okay. All right. Well, I think I'm going to kick off. We'll get things going. Thanks very much for coming along and your support. Listen, just one quick shout out, just to remind everybody, if you like what we're doing here, then go over to have a look at the website, the Zen Gateway.com, the Zen Gateway.com, and sign up to our newsletter. We do not share your email with anybody else. And you will receive once a week from us a newsletter at the weekend with the latest postings from us. Our purpose is to supply information, Dharma, practice, study for anybody who's interested in studying and practicing the Dharma, and particularly obviously in the Zen tradition, though not just limited to that. Also, we also provide news items, information on the Buddhist legacy and the arts and influences and so forth, the odd review and the odd interview as well. So if you like all that, do sign up to our newsletter so that you stay in touch with us. So we'll continue now. As you know, we're looking at the wisdom of the Zen Masters by Venerable Myokyoni. And this is a story about Master Ikkyu. So of Master Ikkyu, it is told that he was drinking thick green tea while a tremendous thunderstorm was raging outside. He was just finishing his last sip when lightning struck and hopped about in front of him. Master Ikkyu slapped the tea bowl over it smartly and thus imprisoned it. Lightning began to feel sorry for itself and begged to be let out. The master, pressing the tea bowl down firmly, refused. On being entreated again on grounds of compassion, the master agreed to set lightning free on condition it would never again strike the temple complex. Lightning promised, and indeed to this day has kept the promise, now over 400 years. So this is a famous anecdote, we could say legendary anecdote, of the great Master Ikkyu, who was an historical figure himself. He was a 14th century Zen master. I did look up his dates, 1394 to 1481. And Ikkyu himself came from Kyoto. He was, in fact, the illegitimate son of the emperor. And because of that, he had to be kept in hiding. Japan had the usual political machinations that our monarchs of the past also had as well. So he had to be sort of spirited away, and he was separated from his mother at a very young age and given to a Zen temple. And in fact, his life was marked by wandering. So this is quite an interesting story, because this is a story about imprisonment. But he wandered about quite a bit from place to place, and eventually he did. Obviously, he had profound insights himself, and he also was given Inka, which meant that he could teach. So he had acknowledgement of his own insight, of his own satori, and his own training. But he was deeply critical of the Zen establishment at that time. And he had a real sort of love-hate relationship with it. He had a very interesting life. He was also a great poet as well, and because of that, Ikkyu, and he was also and because of that, he was a great cultural figure. So he became widely known, not just within Zen circles. A bit like Master Hakuin is also another cultural figure in Japan. So was Master Ikkyu. And the irony was that despite the fact that he was very critical of the setup at Daitokuji as well, the great training Sodo in Kyoto, at the age of 80 he was instructed by the emperor to see the rebuilding of it. At that time, Daitokuji had been burnt to the ground in one of the occasional battles that was taking place at the time, and so in his 80s he had to oversee the rebuilding of it. Sort of, I guess chickens came home to roost a little bit for him. So this is a story, presumably taking place in the latter part of his life, and although it doesn't say he was at Daitokuji, he may well have been by that time. But he was drinking the traditional Japanese thick green tea, whilst a tremendous thunderstorm was raging outside. And just as he finished this last sip, then a bolt of lightning struck the table in front of him. And he had just finished that cup of tea, and in a flash brought the cup down on top of the lightning bolt. And this story, when I was looking through, seeing what we would be looking at today, this story jumped out at me because I thought, here in the UK, we've had 2 weeks now of lockdown, and I was beginning to think that maybe this story would resonate a little bit. Lightning being confined under a teacup might be how some of us are actually feeling now, and I wanted to look a little bit about this subject, because what does the Buddha have to say about where we are now? And just a few sort of observations. I mean, the sort of people who are interested in spiritual practice, or let's not generalize too much. Spiritual practices appeal to a more introverted side of ourselves, and this is something, these terms, introversion and extroversion, were terms that were coined and certainly popularized by the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. And they're still used today. They are psychological categories, and many personality tests still adopt them and test for them. They are very measurable. And you can find yourself on that sort of introversion-extroversion scale. Most people are not one extreme or another. I know people like say, I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert. Yeah, we all have preferences, but none of us really, or very, very, very few people, are entirely one or the other. We are a mixture of both. And I remember when I did the MBTI, which is a personality test that uses Jung's categories and measures introversion, I came up as introverted. And I know a number of my friends, when I told them, were surprised because they said, I thought you were extrovert, because I like talking a lot, and I do, obviously, those of you who know me. But it's true, I do have a very strong introverted side, and I know after a period of talking and relating to people and at the outside world, I get this growing need gnawing away on the inside that I want to be sort of locked away, and I don't want to see anybody, and I just want to sit with a book, or just sit there in quiet and with my own thoughts, maybe. whatever, but I go into that sort of hermit phase. But then after a while, obviously, one has enough of that, and then one feels the need to want to sort of reach out again and explore the world. So we have these two sides to ourselves, and a bit like a seesaw that goes up and down, up and down. And inevitably we are in a more introverted situation. And what's been really interesting, the people I've spoken to, and I've been speaking to people, via Skype and Zoom, and also at the moment I'm in the middle of doing monthly letters for the regular meditation group. They're writing to me, and of course it's all about the lockdown and coronavirus. And it's really fascinating, the mixture between positive and negative effects this is happening. In one way, for many people, it's as if a new world has sort of opened up, and this has been experienced as a very positive thing. And I'm not just talking about people helping each other and so forth, which is obviously great and very positive, but people have found the ability to be able, or found the opportunity, to be able to slow down. And not to hurry, and not to feel that we have to do 10,000 things all at once. And people have been really enjoying that. But of course, the danger is that we can begin to think that we've landed, as it were, and that's great. The point is with introversion, extroversion, that after a while we begin to get exhausted with that, and then something else comes up. The extroverted side wants to hanker and wants to begin to go out, and it's sort of interesting to see, on TV. I watch a bit of news. I try not to watch too much of it now, but there's lots of complaints that people aren't keeping their distance, and that they're going into parks when the sun's out and having picnics, and this really shouldn't be happening. And that's going to be a constant battle, inevitably. However much people might shout or rail against it, there's always going to be that struggle going on, because after a while people get very sick of it. And the longer this goes on, of course, then the more powerful that can become. And people will have to adapt and find outlets for their extroversion that will satisfy. Otherwise it can become very difficult indeed. So yeah, it's interesting. And another factor with this, I think, as well, is that at the moment, obviously, it's enforced. So this isn't something that we have chosen. This is something that is being imposed on us from the outside. We understand why it is, and we agree that it's necessary, but still, there is that feeling, isn't it, that we have to do this. And, let's face it, there's something in us humans that doesn't really like being told what to do. Even when we know it's for our own good, we don't like it, Goes right the way back to kids having to eat their greens, doesn't it? Doesn't matter how many times you tell them. So, yeah, it's always going to be, there's always going to be something of that internal struggle. And even when it's voluntary, even when we do say, yeah, this is something that I want to do. In particular, I'm thinking, for example, when we go on sesshin, which is the Zen retreat, 5 days, you're doing, it's in silence, there's no telephones, there's no mobile phones, there's no internet, there's no reading, there's no TV, there's 8 or 9 hours Zazen a day. It's pretty tough, but it's all part of the practice, and we want to do this practice, and we want to go on sesshin. So let's go. And, I remember for years, because I used to go 3 times a year on the longest, on the 5-day sessions. And it was always the same. The week running up to the Friday, which is when we would go off on the 5-day session, the week running up, I would always be thinking, oh, why this weekend? Why did it have to be this weekend? I booked it 3 months in advance, obviously, but it was always, inconvenient because this or that or the other. And it was only, after several years that the penny finally dropped, that, in fact, it wasn't the inconvenience, it was fear. It was the fear of being confined. And yet the irony was that when I went on it, yes, it was tough, but the silence I loved. the fact that we didn't have to speak, believe it or not, was something that I really, really enjoyed. And the being silent, for example, was the least of the problems. The physical side was much more difficult, actually, for many years. So there is that. And, occasionally we find ourselves in situations that we have volunteered or agreed to go on, and then suddenly we think, oh my God, how did I end up here? And again, I as many of you know, I lived for 8 years in a temple in Shobuan. And I remember that first night, as it were. It was a Sunday back in 2003. And, I packed my bags and most of my stuff was down there, and I just had a small suitcase to take with me. And it sort of got to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had to be there by, 5:30, and I knew I was going to have to go. And I even remember what I was watching on TV. I'm not going to tell you, but I remember what I was watching on TV. And it was sort of something in me counting down the seconds. And then I got on the bus and I went there, and everybody welcomed me, and it was lovely. And we had a meal, and it was. And they said, that we won't be sitting zazen tonight because you can unpack and everything. And I said, thank you. And, everybody was really friendly and did everything to make me feel welcome. And I remember going up to my new bedroom, and I had no idea how long I was going to be living in Shobuan. It could have been for the rest of my life at that point. And I sort of unpacked, and, it was a nice evening. It was in May, so it's rather like this spring, early summer. And I remember sitting down and looking out of the window, and this thought arose inside that just said, "Well, Martin, you've really gone and done it this time." And it was. I mean, I wanted to be there, and I knew why I was there, but there was this part of me that did not want to be there. So, to recognise that we are a parliament of voices. And to learn to recognise those different voices that arise in accordance with different kinds of circumstances. This is part of the insight practice that we need to be doing, because we are here, not just to practice meditation, not to be good at following timetables and all this sort of stuff. Those are means to an end. What we're here for is insight. We're here to develop insight into the motivations that are in, and to the nature of our own heart. So, having sort of said all that, then really looking at this question of confinement, in Buddhist practice, restraint, the practice of restraint, is the major way that we encounter the heart, because whilst the heart is able to disport itself any which way I like, whilst I am able to disport myself any which way I like, then really our desires are invisible. It's only when we can't do something that we want to do that suddenly it pains us, and that's how we know it's there. Otherwise, we don't. So it's nasty medicine, but it reveals the truth, and that is that weird dichotomy. This is why the Buddha said, "Suffering I teach, and the way out of suffering." And suffering, of course, is a translation of the Pali Sanskrit term dukkha. Dukkha, which is translated as suffering, but it's much more wide-ranging than that. It can mean physical pain, it can mean psychological pain, but it can also just mean restlessness, the way that the heart never really settles on something for very long before it's sort of up and off. And there's that nice Hindu analogy, actually, the two birds in the tree who are tied together by a piece of cord. Their legs are tied together. And one bird hops around from tree to tree, eating the fruit, constantly on the move, and the other bird sits and watches. And this is used to describe the sort of two types of consciousness. The first one is very much that I-based one, always sort of looking around for the next thing. And then moving on to it, looking for the next distraction. Sit down, you have a look at Facebook. Oh, just for 2 minutes, and then half an hour later, just a little bit further. Maybe there's something. Oh, there's nothing on Facebook together, but maybe if I just keep scrolling a bit more, I'll come to an interesting article. All that sort of thing that we're well aware of. So, these are things that we discover. These are the things that we get insight into our own heart. And this is why the Buddha said, suffering now teaches the way out of suffering. So that restlessness is very important, that to be able to sit with that. Because what is it really? What is it when we do that? What is it when we find it so difficult to move? And this is, this was the Buddha's diagnosis, really. He recognised that it wasn't the world that was dissatisfactory, it's our heart that feels dissatisfied all the time, and therefore projects it out onto the world. We find the world dissatisfactory. So what happens then when we do undergo some restraint in this way? Again, going back to a session, or going back to living in a temple, or going back to a lockdown, what actually begins to happen to us? And maybe this is something now we're beginning to experience ourselves, particularly if we're spending larger amounts of time on our own. Well, one of the really obvious things is that dissatisfactoriness doesn't go away. It transforms itself. So if you cannot go onto Facebook, if you cannot go onto Netflix, if you cannot go and ring a friend, or go and see a friend, or go into the cinema and do the things that you normally like to do, then where does that restlessness go? Where does that restlessness go? Well, it turns inward. So instead of being out there, it begins to turn inward. And what we begin to experience is that the inner life begins to really light up. We may have begun to discover that, in fact, the inner video film, and the inner narrator become much louder. We're talking to ourselves more, maybe. We become much more preoccupied with our own thoughts. Our feelings become more pronounced. We're beginning to experience our feelings in a more amplified way, and this is to be expected. This is quite normal with that. This happens on sessions as well. It's amazing. I've been Jikijitsu, and that's the person who basically runs the meditation periods. And part of that job is getting up and walking around whilst everybody's sort of sitting in zazen like this, you see. And outwardly, you're looking around. Apart from the odd person who might be falling asleep, most people, you couldn't tell anything, But what's going on the inside? Oh my God! Well, actually, after a while, you can begin to see it, but at first view, you can't. Everything looks, quiet and still. But on the inside, you can have all sorts of things. You can have a real maelstrom going there, and some people really do get it. And it's not because they want to. It's that the whole inner world begins to erupt into something. It's almost like it comes out to fill this space that has been cleared because the outer distractions have now been removed. And of course, that's part and parcel of what a retreat is about. It is to encounter these unconscious contents that are now coming up, and if we're not used to it, that can be very alarming. And on a retreat, there are certain inbuilt activities, obviously, that allow a little bit of pressure to be released without releasing too much, because we don't want to lose this. This is what we came for, in fact. But we have breaks, so obviously coffee breaks and tea breaks and all this sort of stuff. We're always drinking coffee and tea and eating meals and all this sort of stuff. These things become real oases and islands, and then we have free time, and then people are encouraged not to just sit there staring into space, to go out for a good walk, to a good sort of march along, and we might have exercise periods as well, and this allows us, as it were, a little bit of distraction, so that we can take that energy and put it into something. And if we're beginning to find that inner pressure building up at home, then yes, we do need to create a little bit of a timetable for ourselves to help ourselves with that. I'm quite sure now your kitchen cupboards are looking fabulous, and the sock drawer has finally been cleared out, and who knows, maybe even people are darning socks now, heaven forbid. Primark will go out of business now. Well, yeah, those things are important, and obviously people will be reaching out a little bit to speak with each other, emails and so forth. Zoom is doing a roaring business. So these things are very important too, that we build them in. But we do have this opportunity here. We do have this opportunity to be able to just sit with what's coming up. But what do we do with this? What happens with this material? What can we? How do we engage with it? Well, there are lots of different ways to do that. Obviously, in Zazen, we just create the space for it and allow it to come up, and we mull it over. I mean, we reflect upon it. And if we find ourselves being carried away a little bit too much, we pull it back. We come back to the count, and then stay with it. But there are other things that we can do. Those perhaps who want to try a bit more of a creative approach is to, if we wake up in the morning, for example, and we find ourselves just a little bit gloomy, and sometimes you do get a mood that you can't sort of shake off. Well, one of the things we can do, we can take a sheet of paper and a pen or a pencil, and I would suggest that you actually use a pen or a pencil rather than a laptop or a computer. We can write something, create something. But the way that we do that is that we don't use the poem or the writing or the drawing or whatever to escape from what we're feeling. We actually center our heart in the feeling, in the mood, and then we execute whatever it is that we're actually doing. Those who are more musical might like to just pick up your musical instrument. Do this on your own. You don't have to. It's better not to do it with other people. This is inner work, and inner work is really better done solo. So find a space in your home where you can do that, and if necessary, let people know what you were doing, but remind them that this is important, and you regard it as important. If you take it as important, other people will as well. That's always been my experience. So so certainly we can do that, and just it's not with looking at unconscious concepts, with looking at unconscious contents that are coming up. It is not, please, about grasping at them in any way, and that also means not understanding them. They're not to be got in that way. They're to be related to. So they become informing information. The mood itself also got to tell you, you're feeling down. That's it. However, there's something in that downness that we can relate to, and this is a way that we can actually do this through something a little bit creative, and just stay with it. Check in with it. So during the day, as just remember, say, yeah, it's okay. There's this space, and this feeling is there, and just say yes to it. It's okay. It's okay. Even if it's uncomfortable, it is okay. And out of that, then something begins to come. I cannot tell you what it's going to be. It will be a surprise. That much I can. But something will come. Something will come out of that. And it's interesting, this light and dark thing, the unconscious contents, when we first come across them, often appear quite dark, even devilish. And it's interesting because this story, obviously this story of Master Ikkyu and the lightning has very much a sort of fairy tale feel to it, doesn't it? The lightning comes down, he puts the top on it, and then he makes a deal with it. He says, if you want me to let you go, then you must not bother us again. And there's loads of stories like that. In folklore, usually in Western folklore, the lightning would probably have been the devil. The devil comes and is the trickster figure. This is the devil as the trickster rather than Satan. The devil is the trickster figure. He's going to, cause trouble for us, whatever. And then the hero catches him and says, right. And the devil says, oh, let me go. And says, no. The story. One story that comes to mind is, sorry, just had to check. Yeah, there's an old Italian fairy tale that I've told many times. It's very long, but I'm not going to tell you. But there's one bit where a young man who, because he has been gifted by a fairy with a sack that gives him everything, it's like a cornucopia. Anything he wants will appear in the sack, and a stick that will always obey him. And in the story, the young man goes to sort of the equivalent of fairy tale Las Vegas, where everybody's gambling, and there the devil is gambling for people's souls, and the young man is challenged by the devil. I mean, the devil is in disguise, but the young man recognises him. So what happens is the devil challenges him to a card game and wins everything. And just as the young man's about to about to play his last gold coin, the devil sort of sneaks over and says, you know, you can carry on playing if you like. You've always got your immortal soul. And at that point, the young man reveals and says, I know who you are, devil. He says, now jump into my sack. And so the devil laughs and says, I am the Prince of Darkness. You do not instruct me, but this sack is a magical sack. And so the devil cannot help himself, and he falls into the sack. And the young man takes a piece of rope and sort of ties it up, and then calls on the stick and says, beat him. And so the stick starts beating the devil. Yow, 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 yow. So we've got that same thing. Trapped inside, and it's deeply unpleasant. And the young man leaves him like that for quite a while, according to the story. And finally, when he comes back, the young man says, right, if you want me to call this stick off, and the devil says, yes, 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 please, then you will, not bother this town again, you will release all the souls that you have taken, etc., etc. And the devil says, yes, I will. And so he jumps out, stamps his cloven foot on the floor, the ground opens up, and he jumps down, and all the souls come out. And then the young man admonishes the souls and says, do not give in to your gambling life again, go home and live good lives, etc. And off they go. Very, very typical story motif. So this is quite this Master Ikkyu's thing is quite a sort of old story motif. But what can we take from that? What does that say about those things that we encounter on the way in this way? So here we are trapped under our teacup, in effect. What happens now with those things that we encounter once we start encountering them? Well, if we keep that pressure on, i.e. if we do not allow ourselves to become distracted from this pressure, in whichever way it manifests, if we really attend to it, because that's what it means to hold the teacup down firmly. It means to attend to it. You can't just say, oh, well, I'll get up and I'll come back later, because the lightning will be gone. You have to hold to it. This is the discipline now. And so if we do that, then something can change. There's a change of heart. There's that turnaround, which is the change of heart that actually takes place. And I think I remember. I mean, just to perhaps finish on really. I always like that story Venerable Myokyoni told of her own experience when she was learning how to type properly. Now, she used to be able to type anyway, but she always typed with 2 fingers, and she would always have to watch what she typed. She couldn't touch type without looking at her fingers. So she decided, as she was doing a lot more of it, that she would learn to type properly. Now, in those days, you used to get an exercise book. You put a board over the typewriter, put the book on top, so you couldn't see your hands. You put your hands underneath the board, so you couldn't see them. And then you just followed the exercises in the book, which she did. And she got to the end, she took the board away, she began typing, but she found that the old habit kept coming back. Instead of using all 5 fingers, she would just use these 2. So she put the board over again, put the book out, and went through the whole book again. She did this 3 times, almost in classic fairy tale style. And then she took the board away, and she began typing again. And blow me down, the old habit resurfaced again. She was back doing the 2 things. You know what it is? You think, oh, it's fast doing this like this. That's what happened. And so she said no. So what she did, she said she took a timer and she set it for 10 minutes. And she said, right. She said either you switch over to the new habit, the new way of typing using 5 fingers, or we go through that whole book again, and we will just keep going through that book until it changes. Now, do we see we've got that same motif? We've got the egg cup over it, and it will not, and it's been pressed down firmly. We will just keep doing this. That real, there's a resolve in it, you know, that determination to see this through, come hell or high water, no matter how many incarnations it means. We feel the intensity of the energy in that, because that's what's important. This is what really shows the unconscious that we mean what we say. What she found is that when the alarm went off, she started typing, and it was fine. The new habit was there. So there you go, a real life anecdote to show you this process and how this process truly takes place. So that's Master Ikkyu and the Lightning. Thank you for joining me today. Does anybody have any questions? If you have a question, you can just put it in the comment box. I'll just keep talking for another minute. So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we can finish. Perhaps whilst we're just waiting for that, I will just say, obviously we are allowed out as well. We can go for our exercise, and I hope obviously everybody's doing that and really enjoying this time of spring where, despite the fact what's going on in the human realm, the rest of nature is doing its thing at this time, and it's really lovely. So I hope you're managing to get out as well. Okay, no questions, it appears. Everybody has enough to ponder, I think. Thank you very much for joining me this week. Enjoy Easter weekend coming up. Death and rebirth is certainly in the air. Don't forget also, on the 8th, tomorrow, is the Buddha's birthday. So those of you who have a little shrine at home, as is customary, this is the baby Buddha now, it's customary just to put some new flowers on. That's normally the custom. And maybe do a little bit of extra zazen or some chanting or something like that, just to commemorate the Buddha's birth. As I say, rebirth, death and rebirth is very much in the air. So we'll see how that all goes. Okay, thanks very much. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.